My father, who has not spoken to me in 10 years, just contacted me. I am 70 years old and female. My mother died 12 years ago after a long and difficult struggle with brain cancer. Our family went through a really terrible time, but only 6 months after she died, I saw that my father would leave for extended periods of time without telling me where he was going. He would tell me that he was simply going out with pals who were not even in the city at the time. I became suspicious, so I followed him one day to see where he was going and discovered that he was making frequent visits to my single aunt's house. My aunt was 3 years younger than my mother and had 2 children, a son and a daughter who was slightly older than me from her previous marriage. But they divorced after only a year of marriage, and he left her with the children since he did not want custody, and she was raising them with child support and alimony from her previous marriage. So she was somewhat well off, and money was not an issue for her because her ex-husband was wealthy. My mother and aunt were close, and my aunt had always been there for her, right up till her final breath. So it was pretty shocking for me to see my father visiting her. And after following him for a few more days, I eventually mustered the guts to ring the doorbell at her house and check what was going on inside. My aunt unlocked the door that day, and once inside, I addressed them and demanded what was going on. My father had been lying to me about his whereabouts, and I couldn't understand why he was visiting my aunt so regularly. So the two of them finally admitted to me that they were in a relationship and had been for the past few years since my mother's diagnosis. They didn't want to harm my mother because she had little time, and they didn't want to stress her out further by revealing their relationship. However, now that she was gone, they could finally be together. My father even expected me to realize that it was difficult for him to deal with my mother's health after so many years together, and he was in denial. I was already grieving when my mother was sick, so he took solace in talking to my aunt, which eventually led to this type of friendship. I was plainly upset, and I left that day with no intention of ever dealing with my aunt again. They attempted to stop me and talk to me, but I simply went after telling them that they repulsed me and that both of them were disgusting people who had betrayed my mother in the worst way. I'm not proud of it, but I cursed at both of them really badly, and then I returned home that day. When my father returned home later that evening, he informed me that my behavior at my aunt's place was just unacceptable. He was also upset by the fact that I had been stalking him and following him about for the past several days, so he expected me to apologize, but I told him that I was not going to do that and that he could continue playing happy family with my aunt. I was moving out and returning to college since I didn't want anything to do with him anymore. I had taken a short leave from college to be with my father during this difficult time, but when I discovered that he had already met someone, I was so disgusted that I didn't want to return. After I returned to college, my father sent me an email informing me that he was selling the house where I had grown up and moving in with my aunt. Not only that, but he hoped I would be able to accept the fact that he was finally attempting to move on with his life and find happiness. But I hadn't contacted him or my aunt to apologize for my behavior. He believed that we should not interact for some period. He explained that my aunt and cousins did not want me to visit them. I was effectively barred from their home due to my actions, and he agreed with them, so he didn't protect me either, and it was highly unlikely that we would see each other anytime soon. That email crushed my heart, but it is what it is, and I did not even bother responding to him. My parents and grandparents had set up a college fund for me, which I could access as soon as I reached 18, so I didn't have to worry about my bills after that, and once I graduated, I immediately began working because I no longer wanted to rely on my grandparents for financial support. I was only 20 years old at the time, and I had hoped that my father would ultimately come to his senses and leave my aunt, and that we would be able to work things out between ourselves. But that never occurred. In fact, when they went public with their connection, everyone in my mother's family cut off my father and aunt because it was so upsetting. Even my grandparents stopped speaking to their daughter because what they were doing was so messed up. So, for the previous 10 years, I've had no touch with either of them, and I had no idea what they were up to. I had heard in the middle that they had relocated away from here, but I was too busy at the time to investigate further. Even though I miss my father, I've never sought to contact him. Then, approximately a week ago, I received a call from my father after 10 years of no communication. I didn't have that number saved, so I let it ring. But the second time he contacted me, I answered the phone, and as soon as I heard his voice on the other end, I became blank and had no idea what to do. Anyway, once I responded, he told me that it was critical for me to talk to him since he needed my assistance and had no one else to rely on at the time, so I was the only one who could help him get out of this mess. Apparently, he had been in a retirement home for 3 months. All of this was happening to him because my aunt and her children had officially gone too far. He informed me that after they went public with their connection, everyone cut him off, and they moved to the suburbs to get away from the city and everyone else, because it was clear to them that no one wanted to communicate with them after what they had done, and understandably so. Things have been going well for a while. Her children had grown up and were now living on their own, only visiting once or twice a month. However, every time they visited, they would take a large sum of money from him and my aunt to fund their lifestyle. And after a few years, he told my aunt that he could no longer tolerate this type of conduct and that they needed to put an end to it. And that's when the difficulty began, because my aunt believed that as parents, they should always support their children, regardless of age. So, after a lot of fighting, they decided that my father would not give them any money, but my aunt would continue to support them financially. That continued for a few more years, but a few months ago her children approached her and wanted an outrageous sum of money because they were intending to start their own business, but they did not want to put their own money into it. So they asked my aunt and father to invest. My aunt attempted everything she could to get him to invest in their firm, but he refused and stated that he would not do anything unless he was certain that they could, because neither of them had any practical experience, nor did they have a viable business plan to go with. So they had been fighting over it recently, and my aunt eventually decided she didn't want to live with him anymore. They had never married, so there was no official agreement, and the place they lived in belonged to her. She decided to kick him out. For the past few months, he had been living in a retirement home. The only reason Dad was ever set up in a retirement home was because my cousins wanted money from him as an investment, and they were treating him well for now. But a couple of weeks ago, they visited him and told him that he only had 1 month to decide whether or not he would be willing to help them with the money. And if he said no, they were going to stop paying for his stay at the retirement home as well, and he would have to find somewhere to live for himself. The trouble was that everyone assumed he was wealthy and comfortable. Unfortunately, my father's company had not been doing well in the years following the pandemic, so he was not as wealthy as everyone had expected. So even if he wanted to, he couldn't come up with the money they were asking for. So now he was in a very difficult situation where he was losing out on both sides, and he had no idea what to do or how to proceed, because either way, he was screwed, and he was calling me for help because he thought I was doing well in life and that maybe I could buy him something, or at least allow him to live with me for the next few months until he figured out a way out of this mess. Because even if Dad declared he was not going to invest in their business, he was confident that my cousins would ask him to repay the money they had put in for his stay at home. It was a complete disaster, and just hearing it made me sick because I couldn't believe someone could drop to such low levels and be so vile. I told my father that I needed some time to think about it, but to be honest, I don't think I'll be able to help him out here because, while I'm doing well for myself, we haven't spoken in 10 years. I don't want to go out of my way to aid someone who never bothered to watch out for me when it was his turn, so despite assuring him I'd think about it over the phone in a couple of days, I blocked his phone number so he couldn't contact me again. I'm already overwhelmed at work, so this isn't something I need to worry about. In addition, I have a personal life and need to save for my future because I hope to marry my boyfriend in a few years. We've been together since college, and we want to marry next year. We've been talking about it for about a year, and he and I are now living separately due to his work. But he will soon return, and we will be living together. And then I'm not sure I'll be able to support my father, either financially or by allowing him to live with me. So I don't see the point in assisting him right now simply to kick him out later, rather than putting him through all of that. I'm just not going to help him at all. He can just come clean and tell everyone that he does not have the money that they had imagined he does, because his firm has not been performing well. After that, he can spend whatever money he has on renting an apartment and living there. I think it's a fair solution. But I guess after I banned him, he decided to contact my grandparents. Now, I'm not sure if it's because of their advanced age or what, but my grandparents have suddenly decided that I should settle things with my father before I marry because he's trying to reach out to me and fix things with me. And they believe that I should give him another chance. Now let him live with me, at the absolute least, before he embarks on the quest to find an apartment that suits him. I find the change in their behavior strange because they have long despised both my father and my aunt and have always told me that I should never forgive them because what they did was simply unacceptable. But now they believe that I should make amends with my father and bury the hatchet, and it simply doesn't make logic to me. When I tried to dispute with them about it, they made me feel awful and accused me of being uncaring, among other things. So I'm really puzzled about what to do, since if my decision had my grandparents' approval, I wouldn't be concerned about whether I was doing the correct thing or not. But now I'm not so sure. I've talked to my partner about it, and he's also unsure, so I'm at a loss on what to do. And because this is too intimate to share with my pals, I'm posting on Reddit to see whether I'm making the right decision. So I stay because I don't want to help my father out, after 10 years of no communication. Update 1. So, after reading the comments, I decided to go ahead with my decision and informed my grandparents that I did not want to be helping my father and that my decision was permanent. After all, I was an adult now, and I didn't feel obligated to assist anyone in their time of need because my father had never looked out for me, even when I was younger. We were not very near. Many of you have asked me about my relationship with my father when I was growing up. As I previously stated, we were not close, and he was generally working during the day, and even when he returned, he never sought to bond with me like a daughter. I expected my mother's diagnosis to bring our family closer together because he had been taking a lot of time off from work to be at home since his wife was dying, but his connection with me remained unchanged. Instead, he felt it would be more acceptable to spend that time bonding with his sister-in-law. So that was his decision. Now, I don't believe I owe anything to a man who did that to my deceased mother when she was struggling for survival. It makes me wonder whether if she had survived and was still alive today, my father would have picked her or my aunt. Because according to what he told me, their connection began after my mother told us all about her condition. Anyway, all of that is useless today because nothing has worked out for him. My grandparents are the only people on his side right now, and I'm terribly confused. But I've told my grandparents that I'm not going to bail him out, and they are allowed to be upset about it. It's not going to influence my decision. I have a lifetime ahead of me. I cannot bear my father's weight, and my remarks may offend some, but he is currently a load to me. I have also discussed everything with my partner. He believes I am doing the right thing. Thus, nothing else matters, since I know he will never sugarcoat things for me and tell me I am doing the right thing if he does not agree with it. So my conscience is clear, and I'm not feeling horrible about anything. Update 2. Hi. So last week, I texted my grandparents and informed them that I didn't want to support my father, and that was my final decision. So they couldn't trick or guilt me into altering my mind for a few days. They didn't try to talk to me and instead left my message on read. But today, they decided to pay me a visit and try to persuade me to change my opinion in person. I'm not sure why they thought that would work, because I believe I made it clear in my message that I didn't want them to stress me out right now, given how busy I am at work. Anyway, they arrived at my place after I had returned from work, and I was fatigued, so I was in no position to hear any of their crap, and I got that out of the way as soon as they rang the doorbell. I told them I was quite fatigued. I didn't want to talk about anything right now because it would be too emotional, and I wasn't prepared for it. But they still came inside and began discussing how furious my father was. I was treating him like Wei, and they felt I should have more sympathy and be more compassionate to him. I was irritated, so I decided to simply let them speak, and then they'd get the point and leave because I didn't want to engage in the conversation and wind up fighting with them, which would only prolong things. I resolved to keep my mouth shut for a bit. However, they showed no signs of stopping and continued to talk about how hurt my father was and how he was suffering in that retirement home. And then, the worst happened. My cousin threatened him a few days ago, saying they would have to force him out of the retirement home and cease paying for his stay if he did not cough up the money for the business. He told them he didn't have that amount of money anymore. He also needed to save for the future, and his business was not doing so well. So my cousins told him that they were going to have to kick him out, and that he would have to pay them back for the time he had already spent there, because he had just wasted their time. Now, my father had nowhere else to go and was appealing with my grandparents to let him stay with me at my home until he could find his own place. But even that would take some time because he would have to look after his company and devote a large portion of his time during the day, and in the evening, he was too tired to go out scouting for apartments. So my grandparents kept instilling in me that I was literally his only hope, and I had to help him. I was getting frustrated, and when I realized they weren't going to stop talking, I decided to turn the tables and ask them why they felt so strongly about this problem. Why weren't they helping my father out themselves? They had an extra guest room in their home as well. From what I knew, and they could easily afford to keep him out, there was no reason for them to dump him off on me rather than doing it themselves. They made it apparent to me that they felt awful for him. Besides, I didn't feel as awful for my father as others did. The difficulty they were telling me about almost felt like an excuse not to try to get his life in order on his own. That's not how things work for me. If he can afford his own apartment, he should leave the retirement home and find one for himself. There is no reason for him to act like a victim of something horrific. Even if his firm is not performing well, he may be able to turn things around if he has the resources to do so. Instead, he simply chooses to give up and play as the victim in this situation. I have no tolerance for people who lack a fighting spirit, and it appears that my father is experiencing this right now, so I don't want to become involved there at all. Anyway, when I asked my grandparents why they weren't supporting him, they started making excuses about how it would be strange for them because he had done something so horrible to their deceased daughter by cheating on her, and it would be really tiring for them. And I was startled that they believed these were perfect explanations for them, but not for me since he cheated on my mother. My aunt had also shattered my heart, so I could claim the exact same thing and get out of it as they were attempting to do. When I brought these issues up with them, we had a really severe argument. They accused me of being cruel and lacking sympathy yet again, and I was so fatigued that I didn't even try to dispute with them. I told them I did not want to talk about it anymore, and they departed. So I'm not sure if I'm going to talk to them since their behavior is so irrational, and I don't even understand why they're acting this way, but that's okay. I guess I made my decision obvious to them, and maybe they won't try to compel me to alter my mind again. Update 3. It's been a few months since I last communicated with my father, and 2 months ago even my grandparents stopped speaking to me. I wasn't happy with how things were going. I was feeling quite lonely because even my partner was not with me and would only come to see me once or twice every several weeks. But he moved back here a few days ago since he finished his project, and now we are officially engaged and are finally going to start planning the wedding because it will take place at the beginning of next year, and we only have 7 or 8 months to go. We announced it on social media yesterday, and I shared a photo of myself wearing the ring and a few photographs of myself hugging him. My grandparents are not on social media, but I'm sure someone informed them about the engagement, and since there was a party, they must have heard about it. But they still didn't congratulate me. He had also hosted an engagement party, which took place last night. He had taken me for a drive in the evening, and I had a feeling he was going to propose, but I wasn't sure what to expect. So we went to a romantic location that was meaningful to us, and that is where he proposed, and, I'm not sure, a path back home. He also told me that he had prepared a celebration in our honor, inviting all of our friends and family, as well as at least 2 people we got along with. So, after I returned home, I changed into clothing, and we proceeded to the restaurant to spend the remainder of the night with our loved ones. Obviously, my grandparents were invited to this gathering. My fiancé had told me that despite our conflicts, they had always been there for us throughout the previous 10 years, and he wanted to be present. My grandparents declined the invitation, and he didn't want to break my heart yesterday, so we didn't discuss it. But this morning, when I discussed it and voiced my disappointment that my grandparents had not attended my engagement party or congratulated me afterward, he told me the truth. Given how things were going with us, I figured he hadn't even invited them in the first place, but learning that they had been invited and chose not to come was really humiliating. I don't even understand why they are now so enthusiastic about assisting my father. It makes no logic, but it seems worthwhile to cut me off. Then I can't say anything to them, to each their own. So whatever. Hello, everyone. Here is an update. So I'm getting married in a month, and the invitations have gone out. My grandparents did not receive one since, a few weeks earlier, I realized why they were so eager on me assisting my father. So my father and I hadn't spoken since his previous phone call to me, and I decided not to aid him, so I blocked him. Anyway, he didn't speak to me until a few weeks ago, when he eventually reached out and sent me an email explaining everything. So my grandparents were aware of my aunt's romance with my father all along. She had come clean to them right away as soon as they began seeing each other romantically, and had even stated that she wanted to inform my mother about it. But they were the ones who had encouraged them to keep it quiet, because my mother was already suffering from cancer and didn't have much time left, so it was best not to delve into it and tell her the truth, because it would just harm her for as long as she was here. After that, everything was an act, and they had maintained contact with my aunt and father for the previous 10 years, while making it appear as if they despised him and my aunt in order to avoid alienating me. It damaged my trust in such a way that I don't think I'll ever recover, and I'm relieved that none of them are still in my life. They deserved each other. My father had basically blackmailed my grandparents into convincing me to help him, but when they failed, he thought it was pointless to conceal their secret any longer, and that I should know the truth. That is why he sent me that email and included proof that everything he was telling me was real. I'm rather rattled as a result of this because it's difficult to learn that everything you've thought for the past decade was all a lie, but I'm trying to cope. I'm hoping that having the wedding to look forward to will help, as it is keeping me distracted. Then my fiancé and I will go on our honeymoon. Hopefully that will take my mind off of these things, but I hope to be able to move on permanently. I'm just happy to have such a wonderful partner by my side to help me deal with everything. I am quite appreciative for that. Stay tuned for more stories on our ongoing ties.